So today we're going to talk a little bit about powering innovation through a focus on relationships. I'm Bill Latham. I'm the CEO of MeTEOR Education, also co-author of the book, Humanizing the Education Machine. Thank you all for joining us today. I hope this is a valuable webinar. I look forward to fielding some questions as we get through the material. Just to kind of give you an expectation, we'll go through the presentation, and then toward the end we will ask for questions, and you'll have an opportunity to ask those, and I'll respond to them as well as I can. Just to tell you a little bit about myself, I am a chemist by training. I usually tell people that, and there is no reaction to what I say. That's as good as the jokes are going to get today, so hopefully you're laughing at that. If not, they don't get any better from here. After I spent about a decade in the chemical manufacturing industry, I had 3 patents there in cosmetic chemistry and made the logical career shift back in 2001 to school furniture. That's a pretty easy get for people, especially when they realize I did that with a civil engineer as my partner. And so the joke around here goes, a priest, a rabbi, a civil engineer, and a chemist start a furniture company. And you can put whatever punchline you want to in there, and it gets funny from there. But I always took very seriously the impact of learning environments on education. I'm a member of the Association for Learning Environments and an accredited learning environment planner. It's really what led to some of the curiosity about not just how environments have an impact on learning, but the learning process in general and what's gone on in the United States, particularly over the last 15 years with rapidly changing education ecosystems. It kind of led to the book that is the subject of the study guide, or the thinking guide we'll talk about. And ultimately, just as a little off-resume item, I am a black belt in Taekwondo, a 3-time world champion. That is not me, even though it may look like me, because I'm told all of us bald guys look alike. If you want to follow the conversation with me ever on Twitter, you can see my Twitter account down there. And I'd encourage you to check out our website at MeTEOReducation.com as well. So where are we going to go today? First of all, I really want to spend a little bit of time highlighting some of our research from the Humanized book, things that I think would be important to draw out that were at the core of what we found as we went about for 3 years in this work. Second, I want to talk about innovation in education. It's a buzzword, it's a hot topic, but there are some things that are really important that we found in our work that you need to know. And then last, I want to talk about how do you start to shift the conversation, maybe in your learning community, about this subject of innovation. So that's kind of where we're headed. Just to tell you a little bit about the work of Humanize, the book project started in 2014. It was 3 years in the making. About 90 subject matter experts were involved in 8 summits around the country, where we went and looked very closely at education, what's working, what isn't working, what are some of the common threads. We used something called the global mind shift process with my co-author Rex Miller. He really talked a lot about the process being important in tackling big, nasty problems. And we found that the work really helped to change what we think is a stuck conversation sometimes about education and shift what we're talking about. And it really led to a conversation about what we value as authors and as contributors in this work. And so if you haven't had a chance to pick up a copy of the book or to read it, we'd encourage you to do so. But as we go through here, again, we're going to share quite a bit of sort of the fundamental premises or the foundational things that we found. Some of the chapters in the book you might find interesting. We talk about how the road to transformation began in failure. That's a chapter where we look at a community that had a failed school project that led to a 50-year plan to revitalize the community in the Midwest. We talk about the kind of the futurist view of learning and the chapter, the Pandorification of learning, and tackle some subjects like getting beyond zip code. Is zip code necessarily destiny? How would you attack humanizing this great education machine? We talk about the power of social emotional literacy and how do we create healthy learning cultures, and ultimately how do you lead change in your local school community. And there are a lot of other chapters in there. Today we're going to focus, as we get more toward the end of the talk, on the 12th chapter, which is creating a healthy learning culture. It's a key and pivotal chapter, maybe even one of the most important chapters in the book from my estimation, and I'm excited to share some of that with you. So it's not uncommon to see a headline like this. This is from 2015 in Politico. Here's why $7 billion didn't help America's worst schools. And then a scathing review of the goals of we're going to turn around our lowest performing schools and improve graduation rates and prepare kids for college and career readiness. We put $3 billion in economic stimulus money into something called the school improvement grants. And the assessment was that there wasn't a lot that could be discerned from this influx of capital. But this is not an uncommon headline. This is one of those headlines that we see all the times. It's part of that stuck conversation where people just like to beat on the school system and say it's not performing, it's not performing. And it feels very challenging to continue to effort reform in the midst of such headlines. One of my favorite quotes is from Winston Churchill. He says, however beautiful the strategy, you should occasionally look at the results. And so just to start to create a picture of what we found as we started to look at this problem, one of the first things we came across was this. You may be familiar with this. You may have never seen this before, but this is over the last 40 or so years, the total cost, normalized by the way, for inflation of educating a student in the United States is almost 200% more. And we do it with 100% more people. And those three lines along the bottom are the test scores in reading, math, and science that are associated with that additional spend and with that additional staffing. And so one of the first things that I ask people when they look at this is, how would you determine the return on investment at this point in time? Because the public is seeing this, even if they don't have this particular graph. This is something they feel. They might feel it in their taxes, the bond issues in their district. They might feel it when they read in the USA Today that the United States is 25th in math in the world. And so this is one of the things coloring the background of what I might call the social capital gap that we see a lot of times with schools and their communities. A second trend, and perhaps even more important, is when parents are asked this question: what is important to you, most important in judging the effectiveness of schools? The number one answer might surprise you. It's actually that my child is positively engaged in what they do. And the second most popular answer is most important was that they were hopeful about their future. And as you can see there, as the graph sort of goes down, that graduating from high school did not come to the same level as those first two answers. And then when we think about graduating and going off to college, or graduating and starting work immediately, surprisingly, parents say that's not really critical in judging the effectiveness of my children's schools. And then, of course, scores on standardized tests rated very low in this Gallup poll. But the funny thing is, the system is actually set up to work exactly the opposite of what we see in this graph oftentimes. And the great machine helps prepare kids to do well on standardized tests so that they can graduate from high school and go on to what we call college or career readiness. And if they happen to be engaged while they're there, or they happen to be hopeful about their future, sometimes we consider that a bonus. But that's really not how parents see it. And so if we look at this idea of student engagement being important, Gallup has a student engagement poll every year that comes out, about 1 million participants each year. And the information that comes in from that poll is maybe not surprising, but it's disconcerting. And that is, if we were to go back and look in elementary school, these numbers start out in the 80s in terms of kids that report having fun at school, learning something interesting at school, doing what they do best every day. But over the course of their educational experience, you can see what happens is these things dramatically drop off, particularly having fun at school, doing what they do best every day. And so by the time we get through our middle school years, our high school years, one of the things you'd have to say about student engagement is that it's going down as the educational experience goes on for a student. And then when we ask the public questions like this, what is the main goal of public education? We get these three general buckets of answers. That it's to prepare them to be good citizens, or it's preparing them for work, to prepare them academically. And it really is interesting when you think that this graph is really just bifurcated into two main ideas. One is that education is an end in and of itself, academic preparation, getting the grade, getting the degree. or education serves as a proxy for something different, something else, something that's more future oriented. And so right now in public policy and in our school systems, we are in the middle of this policy debate. And I think it will go on for the next decade as we try to come to grips with what do we really believe the main goal of education is. Is it just an end in and of itself, or is it a proxy serving for something in the future? So then it's not surprising when we see the public might say, hey, what are you doing with the money for the singing lessons with these test scores not going up, but we're spending 200% more, or hey, I don't see my child engaged, but that's really important to me, or we can't even really decide on what the main goal of public education is to see a trend that looks like this, where we see confidence falling in public schools. And again, this is a Gallup poll. But one of the things I think that's most instructive about this is actually the graph that most school administrators and school officials that we engaged as part of this project were trying to change, seriously efforting turning this graph around. And so it's really the subject of a lot of where we'll go from here. So here's an example of the kind of schizophrenia that we find in education today. This is a district mission statement from a very large urban school district. And you'll notice it probably looks like a lot of mission statements you've seen, which is that their goal is to improve student achievement, to ensure that children graduate from high school and are prepared for college and career readiness. And at the very end, we see a little bit there of a critically thinking adult, and that's good that it's thrown in there into the mission statement. But in bold there, I'm trying to highlight that this is what we talk about when we say that graph that parents say are important is kind of working the reverse. And the question we have to ask ourselves is, in this culture or in this mission where student achievement, getting somebody to a certain point and then launching them into a college or career, what type of education do we see often flourishing with this type of mission? One of the things that we found as we looked at these kinds of missions is that there was a very conforming side of the education machine, which was about the individual kind of being suppressed, no matter who you are, and a pedagogical understanding of who human beings are and how they learn best. And the question is, do they learn best in situations that are built around conformity, built around high-stakes testing, built around performance, built around these kind of everybody needs to get to this level conversation, or this is the same district's vision statement. And you'll notice something about the vision statement. It says things like creating supportive learning environments where they have engagement, great learning experiences that are personalized, that there's passion, that there's inquiry, that there's exploration and collaboration and innovation, and it doesn't even sound like the same district wrote this statement. And this is the schizophrenia that we talk about. This is the bifurcation of the graph. What is the main goal of education? And what you find, and what we found in our process, was that these schools or these kinds of aspirational statements involve choice. They involve everyone having passions and uniquenesses and learning in their own way, and they appreciate and celebrate the individual. And unfortunately, we can't have both as the main focus of what we're going to do in education. And so it starts to draw a very distinct line between conformity and choice, between standards and between soft skills and the development of an individual for their future ventures. And so when we look, Tony Wagner wrote a book in 2008. It was called The Global Achievement Gap. Many of you may be familiar with it or even having read it. 1,000 CEOs weighing in on the survival skills of 21st century workers. And here's what he found in his research. Critical thinking and problem solving, of course, that makes the top of most people's lists. None of us want to work alongside somebody who doesn't have the ability to think divergently and creatively about a problem. The ability to collaborate across networks. Today's a great example of this. Here I am talking about education, trying to influence thought, but doing it across a network. And so our students are increasingly in a global economy asked to get on these type of webinars and to influence thought and to become comfortable with the technology and to become comfortable with the idea of talking to screens and two dimensions and still offer compelling ideas. And that's a skill set that they found that was very important for 21st century workers. Then we find things like assessing and analyzing information, the idea that if I were to ask and poll how high is the Great Wall of China, the group might Google it, and they would find things like the wall is 6.5 to 8 meters high, depending on where you are on the wall, according to Wikipedia. And the question really is, how do you know that's right? Because it's the skill of actually analyzing and assessing the validity of information that's becoming more and more prevalent, and more the skill that's in demand. Other things you'll find: effective oral and written communication, entrepreneurship, agility, adaptability, and then this idea of curiosity and imagination, or something we might call creativity. This is sort of echoed by the World Economic Forum. They looked at the top 10 job skills of 2015, and they report creativity as the number 10 skill, but they also project that companies will say that that's a number 3 skill by 2020. And so you see how creativity starts to move up the chain. And the question, of course, is if we go back to our conforming environment versus our choice environment, do we really create these kinds of soft skills in the traditional education model? Of course, we know the answer is no. Here's another example of how we sort of start to put kids in boxes very early when we ask them questions like, what do you want to be when you grow up? One of the things we highlight in the book is that most jobs of the future, about 60% of the jobs of the future, have yet to be invented. And when you stop and pause to consider that, that means that the technical skills that kids are learning today, or that we're pushing them toward when we ask them questions like, what do you want to be when you grow up, get supplanted by these sort of soft skills that we see in Tony Wagner's work, the World Economic Forum data, that are really about how do you solve problems, and what kind of problem do you want to solve, and how do you innovate and create a business in and around that. And so this just further underscores the importance of sort of deciding up front, where do you fall on this debate? Where do you fall on which side of the fence? Is this education a proxy, or is education an end in and of itself? When we talk about innovation in education, I said I was going to share a little research with you and then talk about innovation. So when we talk about innovation in education and what it takes, a lot of times this is what I find people think it takes to innovate in education. Let's bring in an expert who can scribe. Let's put a big whiteboard up, and we'll scribe the way to innovate our education system. And it's highly complex, and there's lots of moving parts, and sometimes it's overwhelming. And so I'll leave the slide up for a minute, because this is how you innovate education. And if you want to take a quick screenshot of this, I'm sure this will do you a lot of good. That was another joke. So when we go to districts, work with clients, talk a lot of times with people in the book project, what we found is when we asked about this subject of innovation, who's responsible for innovation in your district? We found that a lot of times in unsuccessful programs, there were one of two answers given. The first one is this answer, which is it's that guy or it's that gal. Some of them even have titles like the Chief Innovation Officer in the district, or it's included as part of their job description. And so we're all relying on that person to help us drive innovation. Another thing that we saw prevalent is this model of innovation, which is what we call the Three Stooges model. And that's where we're all kind of doing our own thing. Everybody is sort of an island unto themselves, and we're making funny noises and sometimes poking each other in the eye, and innovation doesn't seem to take in that scenario either. And so what I'd like to propose to you is that this is actually the picture that best represents innovation, and this is kangaroos fighting. Don't know if you've ever seen that, but this is the mixed martial arts of the animal kingdom, to watch kangaroos fight. And the reason I like to use this as the visual is because the best research that we have from Harvard about high performance teams that innovate are 3 pieces of information. The first is they have to have a highly diverse team. That means a lot of perspectives around the table. And the second thing they need is a lot of cogent action. Now, one of the things that will immediately come to you is, if I have a highly diverse team, how am I going to have a tremendous amount of cogency? And it turns out it's the third element that is most important in innovation, and that is conflict or fighting. And the problem is, fighting or conflict is a lot of times considered a dirty word, or it's something we don't know how to do well because we really haven't been taught those skills. And if we watch political discourse on TV, or if we consider our own, kind of experience in conflict, it's something that a lot of times we shy away from because it seems beneath us. And yet it's extremely important. as an element to have conflict at the right time, at the right level, with the right people in order to lead to a truly innovative solution. And so just as a furtherance of that idea, if you really want to get toward innovation, you need human interaction, conflict, argument, and debate. And if you're serious about transforming and humanizing the machine, you must become comfortable with all of these. And so this is a formula we like to help people at least consider, which is the idea that engagement is really at the core or the base of leading to innovation. If I don't have my team engaged, I'm going to have a lot of trouble getting toward innovation. But it's not enough that they're engaged. They have to learn how to collaborate. And collaborate sounds like a fun word, except collaboration is what we were looking at on the other page. Collaboration is another C word. It's conflict. It's conflict resolution. It's raising conflict. It's competing values that are ultimately, as iron sharpens iron, cleared over time. And that ultimately that leads to innovation. If I disrupt this chain where I am losing engagement or I am suppressing collaboration, I am not going to get to innovation. And innovation, of course, is something that's pivotal for not just the school systems in their survival, but companies, as we know, which are constantly seeking opportunities to innovate. So this next section is called Merry-Go-Round Seesaws and Jungle Gyms, and it's sort of a way for us to just visualize what we're talking about with these ideas of engagement, collaboration, and ultimately innovation. The merry-go-round is a great place to start. Merry-go-round is one of those things, if you're under the age of 30 and you're on here, you may have never seen before. So if we were live, I would ask those of you over the age of 30 to help our millennials to step into what a merry-go-round is. But just for argument's sake, I'll pretend we all know what a merry-go-round is and how much fun a merry-go-round can be. And at the same time, merry-go-rounds are not fun by yourself. In fact, if you were to get on a merry-go-round by yourself, if you were just the one kid, you really can't get it going fast enough to have any fun, and then there's nobody there to see you get sick. So how much fun is that? So when we talk about engagement, a lot of times we're talking about this idea of getting a lot of people to come and to start to push. And you didn't think that you would show up at a webinar that a chemist was doing and not get a force diagram of the physics of a merry-go-round. So for those of you who would be disappointed if I didn't do this, this is for you. And what you can see on a merry-go-round force diagram is that the direction of motion is created here. And there are some forces here like centripetal force, which is the force that pushes us inward. But there's another force here. It's not pictured on this diagram, but I know you know what it is. And it's called centrifugal force. It's a force that goes outward. It's not in a direction that we intended forces to move us. In fact, we were going in a completely different direction with our engaged team. And at the same time, if you were to tell one of our millennials, hey, one thing you need to know about a merry-go-round, the one thing you need to keep in mind is that when you get on, hang on. The idea of engagement is sort of bound up in this idea of hanging on. It's easy to get people to start a movement. It's easy to get people to start to move in a direction together. It doesn't seem like that sometimes, but it's actually not the hard part. The hard part of engagement is keeping them hanging on, keeping the resilience of hanging on when the forces start to be created that run opposite of the ways that we are intending to go. And so when we're talking to people about transformative change, we talk to them about engagement is important, but you have to get people ready for the idea of hanging on, because there will be forces created that are completely outside of what we intend to happen, and it's going to require us to hang on for a bit. So, of course, the second thing that millennials may have never seen, but the rest of us would be very familiar with, is the seesaw. And in fact, this is a super seesaw, I guess, and turns out Spuds McKenzie was still around back then, and so he's on the seesaw here as well. And this is how we talk a lot about collaboration. And the idea of collaboration is important because, again, once we're engaged, we're now working together as a team. Working together as a team is pretty important, but there's some things you have to understand about team dynamics. So if we look at the physics of a seesaw, we understand things like the moment, the pivot point, the forces that go up and down, et cetera, and the length away from the moment that we are in terms of the force that's created. But this isn't really the important thing about a seesaw. The most important thing to remember about a seesaw is don't get on a seesaw with somebody you don't trust. You see, when you get on a seesaw with somebody you don't trust, this can happen to you. You go thud. And so if we are going to get our teams not just to engage, but to collaborate, it's very important that our culture become a trust-based culture. Because as anyone who's ever had this happen to them on a merry-go-round knows, once I've gone thud once with you, I'm probably not getting on the seesaw with you again. And so for leaders, it's important not just to get the engagement moving in the right direction and to tell people to hold on, but it's important that we understand that this is a sacred trust, and that collaboration requires trust, and that conflict requires trust. And then we move on to the jungle gym, or this idea of innovation, right? So we've gone through our engagement level, we've gone through our collaboration, and now we're starting to innovate. And so the question about innovation is always, well, what's the right way to innovate? And we like to use the jungle gym as a good example of this. The physics of the jungle gym are actually quite simple. If you've ever watched a Looney Tunes episode, the law is don't look down, because gravity doesn't actually kick in until you look down. But the reality of how to play with the jungle gym is more important. There is no right way to play with the jungle gym. There are some wrong things you can do, like look down. But the essence of a jungle gym is there are so many right ways to innovate. And so one of the things we found in the book was that these innovative, successful learning communities were not something that you could distill down into look at the formula that they used for innovation. What we found is there were so many right ways that were going on, really associated with the individual needs and the individual critical priorities of each of those learning communities that we were able to look at in the Humanized book. But one thing that's very interesting is there was a common thread. And the common thread was the culture. And so when we think about the kinds of issues that are faced in creating change, about 80% of the issues in change management, according to experts, are tactical in nature. It's a technical issue that we can kind of apply our current knowledge base to. We've got experts in our arena. And actually, it turns out that most everybody who's ascended to any type of leadership or managerial position are really good at solving tactical problems. This is the problem. We need this expert in here to fix it. We can coach it. We can train it. We can plow forward. We can get this done. About 10% of the issues in change management are what we would call strategic issues. They're driven by the need to set a new direction or realign our priorities and resources to match our words and deeds with one another. And it's often things that are happening externally to us. We think about maybe some of the competition that's entered the public school system and the way that that might be creating external forces for change. And those strategic new directions are important. And of course, that's going to take up a leader's time. But where we found these programs really succeeded is on what we call the adaptive issues. And those adaptive issues really deal with transforming a complex, interconnected organic system. And most of that navigation revolves around helping deal with competing values. And by competing values, I'm talking about this debate of test scores versus soft skills, of student engagement versus college and career readiness. And some people would say, well, those are not competing values, but the way they are carried out in the system, we found, often put them at odds with one another. And so the true leaders of transformation are able to work through adaptive issues more so than even the tactical and strategic considerations. So I said chapter 12 in the book is a really important chapter, and here's why. Shadow cultures are talked about in the book. We talk about the culture that we state is what is going on, and then there's the shadow culture, which is how we really get things done. And so we saw in that mission and vision statement earlier ways that we say aspirationally we would like for things to be getting done. But it's very important that we start to bring out what are the real cultures that are at work in the learning communities that we have. And that happens through aligned conversations. It happens by starting to give things names and calling them out into the light and shining a light on values that are in conflict with one another. And it's a very important conversation to be had. And as chapter 12 highlights in the book, if this is not at the forefront and at the kind of entry point of transformation, most of the time people are fatigued enough with the initiatives that have gone on to realize that this change isn't going to stick either. And so until we start to bring these things out into the light, these shadow cultures that exist, and start to really talk about them and really name our competing values and bring our feet down on which side of the value spectrum we are going to hold to in our learning community, we find that change and innovation just kind of stays slugged up and a lot of resistance to that change. So that kind of brings us around to this thinking guide. That was one of the things that we were asked to do almost immediately after putting the book out, is we had a lot of people that said, hey, this is a great book. I'd love to be able to go through this with a small group of people, maybe a group of my teachers, a group of my administrators, some people in my community to really get the conversation underway. And so the thinking guide really came out as a companion workbook to Humanize, and it's organized really by chapters, so it's easy to step through it as a group and begin to digest each of some of these topics. It deals with things like it's about culture, it's not about reform. Some of the principles for positive deviance. How do we get to become one of those positive outliers and not just another thing that the machine has chewed up $3 billion more without a lot of effective change? A lot of times the system is called broken, but the system is actually performing in the way the system was intended to perform. It's just that what we need the system to do is changed. And so this is a way to start to have that conversation within those small communities. Ultimately, it's organized with short summaries of the chapter, some team tasks and activities, and then some individual reflection questions. It's intended to really help people digest the book and then begin to operationalize it in their learning community and what is applicable to us, what are some of the ideas that we saw, what are some of the things that we see in the roadmap here that would be most useful in our learning community. And so with that, I would want to just sort of highlight a few things that you could do related to not just humanizing the education machine, but in dealing with how might we start? What are some things I could do right now? As part of the webinar today, wanted to make a few offers to you. First of all, there is in the chat window now, I think, an email address. So if you want to clip that email address and then eventually, you can send an email that says, I want to do one of the things that's here right away. We can get you started as soon as you're ready. The first thing is some type of personalized web consult from some of the folks that were involved with the Humanized book and also with MeTEOR Education, really dealing with your learning community and some of the unique needs that you have and some strategies that you might consider and some cultural opportunities that there might be for you to move forward with. The second is we're doing a series of executive briefings. Those are live events in various areas around the country. We look for school partners to bring in the Humanized team to talk a little bit about half day, 3/4 of a day, some of the research, and to really dive a little more deeply into this and to create a conversation in that learning community through an executive briefing. So if you're interested in hosting one of those, it's a free event and it's something we'd be more than happy to help set you up with. And then the third is you can buy the book and study guide as a combo and start a conversation maybe in the PLCs in your school or with some of the administrators or with a small group of people. And we even will come out and facilitate an on-site kickoff session with one or two of the authors. And so those are all things that if you have interest in, we'd be more than happy to talk with you about. One of the things I'll draw your attention to is I think it's important that you know where you are today and you know where you want to head aspirationally. At the end of the 4th chapter of the book, we talk about a taxonomy of schools. And this was what we found as we looked at various school communities over the 3 years. And we kind of created this taxonomy as a way for people to name, I might be here, but this is really where I want to head. And what would it take me to, if you will, ladder up or scaffold up in my school? And so we found that there were left behind schools. This is in urban areas. This can be in other, economically forgotten communities where we really have a lot of things that are weighing on the school outside of the school itself. The community might have high unemployment. The SES might be particularly low of the student population in the makeup. And so these are custodial or survival schools. And a lot of time, the kinds of strategies that would be associated, that we advocate in the book with that type of school might be very different from somebody who in the taxonomy might be called a well-schooled but poorly educated school, where we're going through and we really are training for the test, we're really training for the outcome, but not necessarily ending up with students that have the soft skills to really be future ready. And then we found schools that were thriving, community schools, engaged schools, blended learning schools, where the kids' skill sets were really future ready as they were going through their process. And so this is just a taxonomy I'd call your attention to in the book. It might be something that you find interesting. It might help explain even to some of the people that you're working with on, hey, where are we today? Where we might start naming things in the shadow cultures. With that, I just want to leave you with two ideas. One is these things are not silos. The methods that our teachers use to engage, or the pedagogies that are being used, the environments that we're doing our education in, the kind of technology and tools that we're using, create an ecosystem inside of this school atmosphere where students and teachers and their relationships can fundamentally change. The students' relationships with one another, the teachers with one another, and with their students are fundamentally shifting. And so starting to think about this as an ecosystem that should be designed in kind of congruence, as opposed to individual silos that we try to tweak our technology, and we'll try to tweak our space, and we'll try to tweak the way that we're teaching, but they're not necessarily designed in congruence or in an ecosystem. And so a visual that we like to use a lot of times is, this is the kind of ecosystem that we're talking about, where we see the human interaction, we see the integrated technology, we see the spaces that support it, and we understand that this is not one thing, but it's an ecosystem that brings all of these type of elements together. Okay, so with that, the end of the formal presentation, I will try to, let's see, I've got some questions here, and I will try to address some of those questions now in some of the time that we have left. Where can one find the Humanizing Thinking Guide? I'm going to go ahead and just answer that live and say that in the chat window, if you pick up the email that's listed there, you can get a copy of Humanize. I think the first 20 people that got on get the free copy of the Thinking Guide anyway, but we can help you with that and connecting you there. As far as the PowerPoint slides being available, again, if you have a request like that, if you just reach out to the email address that was in the chat window, that will be a place that you can source some of those slides. If you have interest, certainly the sourced slides with some of those studies I know are interesting, and we want to provide those to you so that you can use those. Brian is asking about the teacher being the linchpin for success. And not only did we find that it was important for the teachers to be a part of the discussion, but it turns out that the methodology a lot of times is to drive the change first before we even get into changes in technology and changes in space, to drive the change in terms of practice with teachers. And oftentimes, if you think of the adoption curve, any adoption curve of any new thing, so cell phones, there's an early adopter phase. There is actually innovators, people who are always going to try new things. They stand in line at the iPhone store, make wraps around it because the iPhone 10 is coming and they have to have the first one. And you have the early adopters, people who are going to really jump on things early when they see a good idea. And then you have the early majority, and that's actually the largest group. And then you have the late majority, and those are the people that really have seen it all, and they just kind of close their door. And I think this initiative too will pass, and they have to see some stickiness associated with change. And so that is a progressive system that oftentimes we find has to be done over a series of education cycles or years, where my early adopters and test and learns are proving out the concepts I have of these intentionally designed ecosystems. And then I start to move into some of my early adopters, or excuse me, my early majority. And then that creates sort of the grassroots movement. Too often our time preference is we've got to fix this year or next year. And when the principalship of the United States, we found, turns over 100% every 3 years. In other words, the average lifetime of a principal in a school is 3 years. It becomes very difficult if we don't take a little bit longer approach to the change and do it over multiple cycles. And I think I've got one in there about working in a stultifying environment. I'm going to have to get out Google to find out what a stultifying environment is. But I'm going to assume that that's one that's sort of stifling. Maybe that's what was. It is all about culture. I wish it was about something else. I wish there was another magic pill. But a stifling environment, or one that is not a culture where we find engagement, collaboration, is not going to innovate. It's going to spin wheels. And so when I say chapter 12 is important, I mean that it is about a learning culture, and it is about a culture that accepts and understands and embraces the idea of broad scale engagement, the collaboration, getting back to Brian's question about teachers being not only involved in the collaboration, but feeling safe to fail, and being able to trust that the innovation will continue before they really get behind an innovation initiative. I'm seeing that the webinar chat has got some questions too. Let's see, Lawrence, as a furniture guy, could I talk for a minute about the ability to actually influence pedagogical change? I can talk about it more intelligently. There are several studies that we would be happy to get to you that deal with the way that the physical environment can actually create relational change. I will say anecdotally, what we found when students are facing one another eye to eye, foot to foot, they're a lot more apt to work together, and they're a lot less apt to want to fight. When I'm looking at the back of your head, you're depersonalized to me. We also found that in space, where we find that we can centralize the teacher so that they're just steps away from any group, as opposed to creating fronts of the room or sort of walled off areas that I can't get to just because of the physical configuration of the room, that changes the dynamic of how often the teacher can interact with individuals or with groups. And so those are just some very basic ways in which the environment, of course, transitions are extremely important when we're moving from the different types of modalities that might be involved in a given period of time, where we go from individual to group work, or testing to small group collaboration to demonstration. And so you can lose a lot of time in transition and stifle a teacher's even willingness to engage multiple pedagogies or multiple modalities in a given class period. And so flexible furniture can offer solutions there as well. And we have a whole series of things that we would recommend or bring to a more specific conversation there about the environment. Let's see, got something with the modern teacher achieving digital convergence. We would be a great match with the modern teacher. Well, I think that's a great compliment. So thank you for that. Okay, well, we are toward the end of our time. So again, I'd encourage you to connect through either the email address that was provided in the chat earlier, or I think there will be a survey coming out from the webinar that you can also engage. I thank you for taking your time to be here because I know your time is valuable. I hope you find Humanize important. And I also hope that you find the thinking guide something that will help change the conversation or maybe start a shift in the conversation in your learning community. Have a great day.